I named this submarine Collins.
It's now been more than 2 decades since Australia built its own submarines.
I pay tribute to the Australian Submarine Corporation's ability to so effectively pull this very complex project together.
Now under AUKUS, construction is set to return to Adelaide, with the federal government insisting the pact is still secure after Donald Trump's election win.
Obviously, we were prepared for either outcome, a Democrat or a Republican victory in the election, and are confident that there remains strong support for the AUKUS arrangement in the US.
But long before the Adelaide-built nuclear-powered submarines are due to hit the water, residents are concerned about how the plan is unfolding.
The legislation allows for radioactive nuclear waste to be stored at this facility, a stone's throw away from where people live and right next to a waterway. We're the people who are most affected if something goes wrong.
The legislation allowing for radioactive waste storage at the Osborne shipyard in Adelaide passed federal parliament last month. That was the first time these residents heard about nuclear material being stored on their doorstep.
People have no idea, they haven't been told. If this place became a target, what would that mean?
There's 30,000 people that live in this area, and all the childcare centres and the schools and the families that live in this area, but also waterways that feed the mangroves. There is a dolphin sanctuary and so forth. So none of us in this area have been consulted about it at all.
The Osborne shipyard is in suburban Adelaide, 25 kilometres northwest of the CBD, and within Federal Health Minister Mark Butler's safe Labor electorate of Hindmarsh.
Construction on AUKUS will only start some years down the track, probably into the 2030s. And so some time between now and then, there does need to be, by law, a public consultation process. And certainly as the local member, I expect that to be very, very thorough.
So what happens if the community says no when this has already been legislated to happen?
Well, this is going to happen.
That's not really giving the community a say, is it? If you've decided that this is going ahead and they say no and you ignore them, that's not listening to the community, is it?
Well, government and Parliament has decided that the future defence strategy of the country will involve nuclear-propelled submarines.
The legislation declares the Osborne shipyard, as well as the HMAS Stirling Naval Base near Perth, as designated naval nuclear propulsion facilities. The Act allows radioactive waste to be stored at both sites, but doesn't define what level.
This will all be low-level waste. It's protective equipment that people used in their work around the submarine, essentially the same as people use in their work around a nuclear medicine facility.
Why doesn't the legislation explicitly state low-level waste?
Well, I mean, that's the only waste that is going to be generated.
The Greens say the legislation is also ambiguous around the disposal of nuclear material from UK and US submarines.
One of the key amendments we wanted was to prohibit the storage of high-level nuclear waste from any foreign country, the United Kingdom or the United States, and that was aggressively resisted by both the government and the opposition. Neither the UK or the US have any permanent solution for their nuclear waste, and the UK is the one that's in the most trouble. They have seen with AUKUS a potential sucker down here in Australia who's literally put their hand up and said, yeah, we'll take some of that. We'll help out.
Is Australia going to become a dumping ground for US and UK nuclear submarine waste?
There's been a very clear commitment from Defence that that will not happen. Intermediate and high-level waste will not be stored in Australia. We are going to have to manage our own waste in the second half of this century. We've been clear about that, but that will be on Defence land, well away from population centres, and only for the Australian submarines.
South Australians are sensitive to nuclear issues. In the 1950s and early 60s, the British tested atomic bombs in the state's outback.
What a disgrace! Nuclear waste! What a disgrace!
Over the past 2 decades, the federal government has twice earmarked locations in the state's north to permanently store the nation's radioactive medical and science waste.
After all that happened during the Maralinga test series, to once again be known as the nuclear waste dump state.
We've now got a Premier who's going to fight them all the way.
That Labor state government campaign succeeded in 2004. The latest dump proposal was abandoned last year when traditional owners who were excluded from consultation won a legal case in the federal court.
We prevailed, David and Goliath, and won the case for Bangala people and First Nations people.
In August, the Federal Resources Minister Madeleine King told 730 lessons had been learned.
I am determined into the future, as we look to establish that a permanent disposal pathway for low and intermediate level waste, that everyone's concerns are listened to and taken account of, and in particular that will include traditional owners.
But the Health Minister says that pledge doesn't apply to AUKUS nuclear waste.
They are not the same thing as a large, permanent, multi-decade, maybe even multi-century facility that includes very vast amounts of low-level and intermediate-level waste, which is really what you're talking about and talked with Minister King about.
Yeah, it's sly and conniving, that's how I feel about it. As an Indigenous woman, I think I get used to it. Government being underhanded, not telling us anything or not asking.
The Osborne shipyard in Adelaide is on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. Elder Margaret Brodie says her community should have been consulted about AUKUS waste before the legislation passed Parliament.
I sort of didn't think the government could make up their minds like that to do something so destructive. It's feels like it's out of our hands. We don't have a say in it. If you talk about closing the gap, they're not going to close the gap by doing things like this.
The radioactive waste facility at Perth's Naval Base needs to be up and running as early as 2027, when one UK nuclear submarine and up to 4 US boats start regular rotations.
I would want to reassure people that the low-level waste associated with the construction and with the rotation of these submarines is no different to the low-level waste that we've managed very confidently, very expertly over many, many years in nuclear medicine.
In South Australia, the state Labor government is in lockstep with the Commonwealth on AUKUS, but the local council is opposed to any nuclear storage at Osborne.
How far are we prepared to go? Well, I think we're in it for the long haul, that's for sure. We don't want our children, our grandchildren, to have to deal with this in the long run. We'll definitely be making it an election issue.